Rwanda and our neighbors have done things to each other many times over the last 50 years that we need to reconcile in order to really have a sustainable peace. And that really begins in our country.
It is the week of January 31st, and welcome to episode 116 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that explores the disagreements between the political left and right on issues of national security and foreign policy. I'm Lester Munson, your host. Anais Kanimba is the daughter of Paul Rusesabagina, the manager of a hotel in Rwanda, where he protected hundreds of Rwandans, both Hutu and Tutsi, from the genocide that engulfed that country in 1994. Today, Paul Rusesabagina is in prison in Rwanda, having been kidnapped and put on trial under conditions that are far from fair and just. Today's episode will feature a deep dive on the life of Paul Rusesabagina and on his daughter Anais's campaign for his freedom. Anais, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here with you, Liz.
Yeah, we're thrilled you're here. Let's start off, if you're okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Where are you working now?
Yeah, so I was born in Rwanda in 1992, and I've had the privilege to live on the African continent, in Europe, and in America. I spent my studies, I would say that I studied my later education was in the United States. I attended a boarding school in New England where I was learning English through high school. And then I was very fortunate to study at Georgetown University for my undergrad, where I studied biology of global health. And I've been since working in the international development field as a global health expert. I was working at a company called Palladium here in Washington, D.C. And I've loved Washington, D.C. so much. And it's been a great place to kind of learn about international development, about so many different cultures. But unfortunately, I had to stop my job in last year when my father was kidnapped. And I've really dedicated my time since to secure his release.
And before we get into the details of your dad's case, tell us about your dad. What's he like? What does he mean to you?
Yes, my dad is my hero, and I'll tell a little bit more about why he's such an important person in my life. Like I said, I was born in Rwanda in 1992 amidst the Civil War. The Civil War led into a genocide in 1994, and I lost my parents in the genocide. I'm technically Tutsi in Rwanda, though we don't have ethnicities anymore. But that meant that during the genocide, my parents were killed. Both my mom and my dad were killed. And my father, Paul Rusesabagina, with my aunt, Tatiana, took me in their home. They raised me. They took care of me as their own children. They've provided me for everything I wanted, I've ever hoped. They've given me love. And for this, my father is my hero. And he's really the reason why I'm here today. And so my father, is a person with a lot of kindness and generosity. And the fact he's raised me, I think shows the kind of man who he is.
Anais, that's an amazing part of your dad's story. It's an amazing part of your story. It's also an amazing part of your dad's story. And I want to ask you about what he did in 1994. But first, I just want to explain for our listeners, for those who are not as familiar as maybe the rest of us, that in 1994, Rwanda was engulfed by a genocide that killed somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people in just 3 months. It was a horrific, terrible event. There's a lot of history involved and a lot of guilt that is shared by a lot of people, but also some amazing stories that came out from that time. And your dad, in a lot of ways, was the best story that came out of that genocide. Can you talk about that story, about what he did in Rwanda during those 3 months in 1994?
During those really horrible days, the darkest days of Rwanda, I would say, my dad, he was a hotel manager in Kigali. He was a hotel manager of a pretty big hotel where a lot of businessmen and businesswomen would go there. And so and a lot of Europeans also would stay at a hotel. And when the war broke up, the genocide part broke up, he decided to do the right thing. He decided to use his hotel as a place for refuge. He didn't want to stand for the injustice that he saw there. And he saw this opportunity to see with the hotel to save people and to bring people in and offer refuge. And so over 100 days, he had over 1,000 people in the hotel who all were saved. Nobody was killed. Everybody went to the refugee camps after with his support. Every single night and every single day, he would call everywhere around the world to seek support because the world had closed their eyes on our country. And so my father, I think, was a brave man in a time where a lot of people were not brave, and a lot of people were scared and of the future. But for him, he loved the country of Rwanda. He loved his neighbors and his family. And he saw that any kind of ordinary person should be doing what the right thing and anything in their power and their means. And so what his power was to open the door to his hotel. And so that happened right at the beginning of the genocide, when many of the international folks had to leave and were evacuated and the hotel was empty. And ever since then, he's always reminds us that, whenever adversity happens, whenever something wrong happens, is don't hide away, affronted, and, stand up, do the right thing. And that's always try to do it. And it's a pretty big shoes to fill.
I've been to Rwanda on ice. I've been to that hotel. I've stayed in that hotel. It's incredible. Even being there, you can't imagine the things that people went through during that time. And Rwanda itself is a beautiful country, incredible countryside, these amazing terraced farms that are incredibly productive. It's just for a visitor, at least for me as a visitor, it's impossible to imagine the things that went on during the genocide. And I don't know, I don't really have a question here except to say to you, it's terrific to be able to talk to you, who is such an important part of your dad's story, when he was really like the best thing that happened during the darkest time. Like his example and the things that he was willing to do at risk to his own life, I think were beyond just what he did for the people in the hotel, were inspirational for people around the world who saw what happened in Rwanda, were horrified, of course, and were looking for what is the good part of humanity. And there was your dad, who had done this thing at really just the bravest thing you could possibly do: stand in the way of darkness and evil and try to protect innocent people. So I guess I don't have a question there except to say thank you for telling that story.
No, of course. And then, the story of my father, we were very fortunate that it was told in the Hollywood movie Hotaruwanda, and we're lucky to share a story to the world, the story of Rwanda. But something my father has always made sure that people know is that there were a lot of other people too in Rwanda who tried to do what they could, but unfortunately their voice was never heard and their actions were never shared with the world. And I think in this last year that I've lived some of the worst things for me in my life, after the genocide, I would say, with all the difficulties and all the hardships and all the challenges that I've seen, really the sadness that I've seen missing my father the last year, I've also seen so much humanity. And often people ask me, why aren't you so sad? Why aren't you more upset about the situation that your father is in? And the reason why I'm not so angry is because I am, but it's because the world has stood up. So much humanity has come to us. And I believe that in Rwanda too, when my father decided to do that, he was hoping that he will not be the only one standing up against evil, standing up against injustice. And so the story of Hotaruwanda is the story that tells our family story, my father's story, but know that there are many Rwandans who also fought against these killers. But unfortunately, the story was never told. And my father has made his life works to tell the story of other people and to the voiceless.
Let me ask you about the Presidential Medal of Freedom. President George W. Bush gave your dad the highest civilian honor this country can give. Tell us what that was like for you and what you think it was like for your dad.
It was a very, very, very big honor for my dad. He couldn't believe that the United States president, would recognize him for what he felt was an ordinary thing to do. My father never saw himself as a hero. And so being recognized for his bravery during the genocide by the President of the United States, for a man who was born in the village, in a deep village of Rwanda, it was a big thing for him. It was an incredible honor. And it was also important too, because President Bush is a president who's shown a lot of care for Africa and is a person who knows a lot about Africa compared to the other presidents in the past. And so being George Bush, the one who recognized him, also made an additional impact for him, but also for our family.
And I want to ask you about the stuff your dad has done since the genocide. And I know it's a long story. He's been very active. He's said a lot. He's done a lot. But encapsulize for us, for our listeners, what he's done in the cause of human rights in Rwanda since the genocide.
His life's work really is to use his platform to speak about the voiceless of Rwanda. And the main issue in Rwanda in the last 20 years has been this lack of democracy, lack of freedom of speech, but also the killings that have happened around our country, specifically in the Congo. And so there's a lot of deep pain and healing that needs to be done in Rwanda. And it's for that my dad decided to really engage in truth and reconciliation in the region, in the Great Lakes of Africa, because the Rwanda and our neighbors have done things to each other many times over the last 50 years that we need to reconcile in order to really have a sustainable peace. And that really began in our country. And so that's really my father, his life work. It was really to bring this truth and reconciliation, to highlight the injustices happening in Rwanda, because it's such a beautiful country, like you mentioned, and we'd love to live in there with people happy and better.
Nice. If I can just offer like my view of what's going on, it seems to me your dad has continued his brave stand since the genocide, been willing to say things about the situation in Rwanda that are not appreciated by the powers that be. He's been very courageous about that. And he's talked about human rights. He's talked about democracy, about the need to reconcile these past wrongs and move past them into an era when everyone is able to get along better. It's really the most important message there can be in our secular world, right? He is an advocate for peace and human rights. And I think and I will just point out, because I don't want you to have to do it, that there have been people in the government who've been very critical of him for taking this brave stand, because they see that as a threat to them. And it's kind of led to this situation where he is now. So I want to ask you to kind of, let's go to the not as happy side of your dad's story and tell us how he got to be in prison in Rwanda, what happened. What was the mode by which he finds himself in this situation?
Well, like you just said, really, like the way he was speaking out really made him recognized in the high levels of the Rwandan government. And because in Rwanda, it's a country where you cannot criticize what's happened. You cannot criticize a country because Rwanda is just so beautiful. Nothing bad happens over there. And so really anybody who dares to criticize the current regime, there's some consequences. In the past, they used to call my father a génocidaire. And a génocidaire, for those who don't know, are the people who committed the genocide in 1994. They've accused him of many, many, many things. And so this regime is a regime that represses critics. And they've really engaged in this practice of transnational repression over the last 20 years or so. And this culminated with my father being kidnapped. And so he was going on a trip to Burundi, where he was invited by a Burundian pastor, who we found out later was a spy of the Rwandan government. And he was tricked to leave San Antonio, Texas, where he was last in August 2020, and to fly to Burundi to speak what he usually does, really about truth and reconciliation to some church congregation and others in Burundi. And to his surprise, the flight that was going to Burundi landed in Kigali.
Anais, can I just stop you there for 1 second? And I don't mean to interrupt this incredible story, but for our listeners who don't know, Burundi is a neighboring country to Rwanda. It shares in many ways some similar characteristics as Rwanda. It is almost a mirror image in some ways to what happened in Rwanda. So your dad going to Burundi to talk about what was happening in Rwanda was a a logical thing for him to be doing to bring his message of peace and reconciliation.
Yes, exactly. Because in Rwanda, like you said, in Burundi, Burundi and Rwanda, back in the days under colonial power, used to be one country. So in Burundi, you have Tutsis and Hutus. So what happened in Burundi usually trickles over in Rwanda and vice versa. So we've shared a lot of the similar history with that country. And that's why truth and reconciliations are very important topics in the discussions for him to do it over there. And so when he traveled to Burundi, thinking that he was going on this, to Burundi, his flight was derailed and went to Kigali. And upon arrival, he was taken into this place where he was tortured for 3 days. He was incommunicado. We tried to reach him for those 3-4 days. He was gone. We couldn't find him until the morning of August 31st. I woke up to pictures of my father handcuffed at the Rwanda Investigation Bureau in Kigali, with pictures of him. And we were very, very confused. We did not know what happened, how he would have arrived in Kigali, because it's a country where he will never dare to go back, given that the regime had said that they wanted to kill him. President Kagame has mentioned he wanted to kill him several times in the past. And so it was a very, very big shock. And once he arrived in Kigali, we found out that he was in Kigali, the nightmare continued. The nightmare led to a sham trial. They accused him of terrorism, and then they forced him to go to court without lawyers. They forced him to go to court without having to read his case files. They denied him confidential communications with his lawyers and within the U.S. Embassy that went to see him. They denied him to read his case files, and then also they didn't give any resource to prepare his defense. So they essentially kidnapped him to throw him in jail for life. And they used the justice and legal means as a disguise to this political motivation against him. And so, we've been working very hard over the last year and a half to try to secure his release. But my father's has definitely, he's been in the worst conditions because the prison system in Rwanda are very bad. And all of this really is because he dared to criticize the regime. And that's what happens when one does that to President Kagame.
Tell us more about how your dad himself is doing. What's his health? What's his attitude? How are you able to communicate with him? And if so, how?
So with the support of the U.S. Government, we've been very blessed to talk to him every Friday. We get to hear his voice, and that's what's keeping us going. We're going by the week these days. For the last year and a half, it's by the week. When we hear his voice, we feel so much better. But we know that when we speak to him, he cannot speak freely, and we know that he's not telling us everything. And the most scary part about that is his health for us, because we know that he cannot tell us when things are wrong. He's a cancer survivor. And he also has hypertension. So during this pandemic, where health issues are even heightened, and the fact that COVID is here, we are just very, very scared. And the treatment that he's received for somebody who's 67 years old has been really difficult for us to swallow, I'd say. And so we're very, very scared for his well-being. But mentally, he is there. He is really staying strong. He reminds us he loves us all the time, but he keeps his conscience going, and his conscience, that's what he always tells us, my conscience is what keeps me going, and his conscience is to do the right thing. And he knows that he didn't do anything wrong. He knows he's being accused, and his accusation was politically motivated. What he knows is to continue to say the truth, and the truth is what we also trying to do, and the truth is his innocence. And so we're so lucky to get to speak with him, but it's a difficult period for our family and for him mostly. He's actually been in solitary confinement he was in solitary confinement for almost 8 months. And then after that, he was in isolation, and he's been in isolation since. He cannot speak to anyone in jail. He can only speak with us on Fridays. So sometimes when we speak with him, we can hear his voice is not as the voice of somebody who hasn't spoke to others. So it's tough out there, but he's staying strong. He's our father, and he's doing his best to stay strong and to stay strong there.
Amazing. Tell us what you and the rest of the family are doing now to try and win his release from this political and unjust confinement.
So we're trying to raise as much support as possible because we know that we'll never be able to get him out of there by ourselves. We need the support of the US government, of NGOs, and everyone to rise up. And so the main thing was to begin, we worked in Congress, and right now, actually, Congressman Castro is going to introduce a resolution along Congresswoman Kim in favor for his support. And so we've seen, and we've also seen additional support through congressional letters. We're very fortunate that this is a bipartisan issue that Congress cares about. However, my father is still in Kigali, and so we need to put more pressure on Kigali to get that done. And so we're also raising support from NGOs, specifically the Lantos Foundation has been a big support for us, and they've helped us to actually apply for Magnitsky sanctions against the people who kidnapped my father. There's this Minister of Justice who actually went on record on TV saying how the Rwandan government paid for the plane to kidnap my father, admitting to denying my father's rights for basic rights, legal rights, and admitting to reading my father's communication with his lawyers. And all those are criminal activities conducted by a Minister of Justice. And so this is why tools like the Magnitsky sanctions exist. And so we're very blessed that organizations like the Lantos Foundation, Redress, and others have also engaged in this. And we saw in the United Kingdom that the British Parliament actually asked Boris Johnson to consider Magnitsky sanctions on this on this minister who is going to become the ambassador of Rwanda to the United Kingdom. We've also been really lucky to have the support of general people, including people from Hollywood and from different organizations. And so we're hoping that there's going to be more movement and momentum behind this case in the next couple months. I won't talk too much about it because we have some exciting stuff happening, but I'd love to let you know, your audience, that people from all walks of life are trying to help us. And lastly, we've been very, very fortunate that this trial was monitored by the American Bar Association and the Clooney Foundation for Justice through a Trial Watch program. And so the Trial Watch team is going to provide a report about what happened in the last year to my father. That will help us really share the story of his story in Kigali, the injustices, but also really for the world to understand kind of the challenges behind this and to really stand up against this injustice. And so we need more support. I will never stop asking for support because we cannot do this by ourselves. But we are very, very fortunate thus far what we've achieved. And we're continuing to working hard to achieve more because we miss my father so much. And whatever we'll do, we'll do whatever it takes to bring him back home.
So Don Cheadle played your dad in the movie, which and I believe he was nominated for an Academy Award for that performance. You've got George Clooney involved. You really need the whole Ocean's 11 gang to come in and rescue your dad. Like, if anyone can break him out of prison, I think it would be those guys. All right, I'm joking a little bit. This is an incredibly serious matter. And I can't tell you how moving it is that you came on here and shared the story and really laid it out so well. This crime that has happened against your father that I think is something that should be really offensive to all of us. Let me just ask you one more question before we close. How is the Biden administration handling what's going on with your father?
The Biden administration, I'm going to take a step back a little bit about my father, but really about wrongful detention and hostage cases. The Biden administration has been very slow in bringing back Americans home. And many families of wrongful detainees are quite frustrated about the Biden administration so far. But, we are very grateful for the support that we've received so far with the State Department because a lot of people are working hard on the case, but it's just much slower than it should be. And we know the United States has the means and the resources to help our loved ones and to bring them back home. And so, over the last year, I've got to meet many other families. Some of them have their loved ones in in Russia, others have their loved ones in Venezuela or in Iran, in places that are very difficult to work, places that are adversary to the administration today and to the country. But Rwanda is a country that the Biden administration has worked with. And so it's a place that is a partner with the Biden administration. And so we would love to actually encourage the Biden administration to leverage the relationship with the Rwandan government today to save my father, to also show that, if they can leverage the relationship they have with a partner to bring back a wrongful detainee like my father home, they can give the hope for other families who are in Russia, in Iran, or in Venezuela, or in China, that their loved ones can also come home too. And so I'm thankful for the efforts that they've done so far, but I'm asking them to do more and to leverage everything that they can to bring him back.
Anais, this is just an incredible story. I want to thank you for coming on and talking about it. And I also want to say we're happy to do whatever we can to help you in this campaign to free your father. I hope we can have you back to talk about a successful campaign to get your father out of prison. And I hope maybe even he would come on and talk about what happened. But until that time, we want to keep working with you. Thank you again for coming on and being willing to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Les. And I hope that my father will be here with you and not me.
Me too. Me too. That's a wrap. As always, Fault Lines is produced by the National Security Institute. Find out more about the Institute and upcoming events at nationalsecurity.gmu.edu. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover in the future, send us an email at nsi@gmu.edu or tweet us at MasonNatSec. If you like what we are doing here, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe so more people can find our show. We'd like to thank Claude Jennings for editing and Maeve Cronin for production assistance. Join us next week for another provocative conversation and further analysis of national security's fault lines.